1960, Lyndon Johnson was running for president. Actually, he was running at this point for the Democratic nomination for president. And he was preparing for a debate. The three leading candidates were going to have a debate, a televised debate. And they were in the green room waiting to go out, and they were just sharing chit-chat. The three leading candidates were, well, Lyndon Johnson from Texas, John Kennedy from Massachusetts, and Stuart Symington, another senator from Missouri. Now, Kennedy was by far the junior of the three. Johnson was the Senate Majority Leader. He was the most powerful figure in Congress. Symington was very distinguished. He had a long career. And they were just chatting back and forth, and John Kennedy, Jack as he was usually known, turned to Johnson and Symington, and he said, "Fellas, Stu, Lyndon, I got to tell you about a strange dream I had last night. In this dream, God reached down from heaven. God reached right down from heaven and tapped me on the shoulder. And he said, 'Jack, you're my boy. You're going to win the Democratic nomination. You're going to be the next President of the United States.'" What do you think of that? Symington shook his head, said, "I don't know what to think of that. That's because it's very strange. It's very puzzling. Because you see, I had a dream last night. And in my dream, God reached down from heaven and tapped me on the shoulder. And he said, 'Stu, you're the one. This is your year. You're going to get the nomination. You're going to win the presidency.' What do you think of that?" Lyndon Johnson just listened through all this, and he shook his head, kind of furrowed his brow, tugged on, he had a long chin, tugged on his chin, and then he tugged on one of those long ears. And he said, "This really is very strange, because I had a dream last night. And in my dream, I don't remember tapping either one of you on the shoulder." Anyways, Johnson decided that civil rights reform was going to make his reputation. He also decided, and this is where I have to admire Lyndon Johnson. There are a lot of things that are easy to dislike about Lyndon Johnson. But I got to admire him because the main reason he promoted civil rights reform was that he decided it was the right thing to do. He had grown up in a Texas that was marred by segregation, and the segregation applied in Texas not simply to African Americans, but to Hispanics as well. Right out of Southwest Texas Teachers College, he taught school in Cotulla, Texas, and his pupils were all Mexican children, children of Mexican immigrants. And he saw the kinds of exceedingly difficult lives they lived. He saw how they were looked down upon by whites in the neighborhood, how they were treated fully as second-class citizens, African Americans, where he taught subsequently in Houston. He saw the same attitude toward blacks in Houston. And he decided that this was simply unsupportable in a democracy. In a country like the United States, this vestige of the old days, this vestige of the slavery era, could not be allowed to persist. And he decided that he was going to put all of his persuasive skill, all of his authority, all of his power behind civil rights reform, despite the fact that he knew it would cost him and his political party dearly. And on the night, it's a long but very interesting story, a chapter in American political history, how Johnson managed to ram that civil rights bill through Congress. Johnson was absolutely shameless in using every technique of persuasion to get people to support him. Lyndon Johnson was not effective on television. He was devastating on the telephone. In the course of the lectures, I've talked about how different presidents master different media and different stages of technology, and how Theodore Roosevelt became the president he became in large part because he understood the newspaper business in the early days of the mass newspaper circulation, when newspapers cost a penny and there were these circulation battles. Franklin Roosevelt owed a great deal of his success to his virtuosity in the use of radio. Franklin Roosevelt spoke on the radio to millions of Americans, but he used the radio in such a way that those millions of Americans thought he was speaking to them directly. John Kennedy was brilliant on television. And you can tell this, there's a sort of a little bit of a controlled experiment in 1960 when John Kennedy is debating Richard Nixon for the general election. And those people who listened to the debates on the radio and were asked, who do you think won? Most of them said Nixon won. Those people who watched the debates on the television, most of them said that Kennedy won. Lyndon Johnson was brilliant on the telephone. How do you know? How can you tell? If you go to the website of the LBJ Library, and you can actually get there from the website from the Ford Library Museum, because they're all connected to the National Archives and Records Administration. And you can go there, you can listen, you can download an audio file and listen to Johnson on the telephone. And it's remarkable how this guy can use the telephone. Ronald Reagan would come along and he would be even better than Kennedy at television. The internet has yet to find its president or its political candidate who has figured out exactly how to exploit all the possibilities of the internet. But I'm just going to make a prediction here that within the next 10 years, some president is going to figure out how to make use of this new medium, and will just change our ways of thinking about the presidency, just as each stage of technological development has done in the past. Johnson also was astonishingly effective in person. And again, I spoke to a small group about the Johnson treatment. How many of you heard the story of the Johnson treatment? Okay, again, just a few of you. All right. Well, the Johnson, I won't go into the whole thing. I'll just describe the half Johnson. Lyndon Johnson, well, one thing I didn't tell you is Lyndon Johnson was elected to Congress when Franklin Roosevelt was president. And as a freshman congressman, Lyndon Johnson realized that connections meant a lot in Washington. So he wanted to make sure that he met everybody as soon as possible. And so he took a room in a boarding house. And in those days, a lot of members of Congress lived in a boarding house. They didn't have homes in Washington. They still kept their primary residence back in their congressional districts. And so they stayed in a boarding house. And Johnson found out which boarding house most of the congressmen stayed in, and he decided to take a room there. And he tried to figure out how the best way to meet the other people in the boarding house would be. In the rooming house. So how to meet them all? Now, what does everybody have to do during the course of a day? What would they all do in this rooming house is like a big dormitory, basically. They all use the bathroom. So Johnson would lie in wait in the bathroom. He would shave 4 or 5 times. He would brush his teeth about 25 times. He'd be in there, and a lot of people thought, wait a minute, this is a little bit weird. This guy's hanging around the bathroom? I don't know. Anyway, but he got to meet people. He would figure out how influential members of the executive branch got from their homes, often in Georgetown, to their offices. And he would these days we'd say he would stalk them. What he would do is he would figure out, okay, what street do they walk down? Okay, they walk down this part of Pennsylvania Avenue. And he would stand there in the windows of one of the shops and see them coming. And then as they pass by, I'd say, oh, Secretary Perkins, well, how funny running into you here. And are we going the same street? I guess we are. And so he'd walk along.